Where's my meal? The question sliced through the cabin air like a blade, delivered with the clipped tone of a man used to being obeyed. Every first-class passenger looked up. Some glanced away quickly, others lingered in wary curiosity. But none of them moved. At the center of it all, in seat 1A, sat Nathan Cole. The kind of man whose name appeared on magazine covers, whispered in venture capital boardrooms, and stamped on the front of private jets. Today, however, he was in a commercial cabin, and that, his assistant would later mutter, was mistake number one. The flight attendant standing before him, a young woman in a neatly pressed uniform, swallowed once before answering. "I'm so sorry, sir, we had a catering error. The last first-class meal was served to the passenger in 1C. We don't have any more left." Nathan's jaw tightened. His eyes, icy unnervingly calm, didn't blink for a long moment. Then he said louder this time, "So you ran out of meals." For me, passengers in the second row felt the tension ripple like static. Someone coughed. Another fidgeted with their phone, suddenly fascinated by an empty screen. The flight attendant's voice dropped to something apologetic. "Sir, we can offer you a business class entree, or snacks. Anything you'd like we can—" Stop. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The word landed with the weight of authority honed over decades of cutting deals and cutting down competitors. He leaned back in his seat, a slow, deliberate motion, and studied her face. In that silence, people began to understand that this was not about food. Nathan Cole had not always been this way. Before the headlines, before the glass towers that bore his company's logo, there had been a boy from Detroit who fixed broken radios for neighbors and carried groceries for tip. His father worked double shifts at the steel plant. His mother taught him that dignity didn't mean wealth, it meant how you treated people when nobody was watching. But success can calcify kindness, and over time, the boy's humility hardened into something else. Now Nathan commanded empires. Investors deferred, employees feared. And somewhere in that ascent, the quiet patience he once carried was buried beneath layers of entitlement and expectation. Yet beneath the corporate armor, there were still scars, unseen ones, deals that had cost him friendships, choices that haunted him late at night when the boardroom applause faded. The loneliness of power had eaten away at the young man he once was. The flight attendant standing before him didn't know any of that. All she saw was the CEO who had started speaking like a man issuing orders rather than requesting service. All she felt was the chill crawling up her spine when his gaze didn't waver. He looked past her to the galley, to the captain's door, to the silent cabin that had fallen under his control like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. "Bring me the captain," he said at last. Passengers stirred uneasily. The woman in 1C, who had been served the last first-class meal, a perfectly seared salmon with lemon beurre blanc, lowered her fork. The scent of the dish, rich and buttery, now felt almost accusatory. The crew exchanged uncertain glances. The purser, older and more composed, approached with a kind of weary grace. "Sir," he said softly, "the captain is attending to flight operations. I can assure you." Nathan's eyes narrowed. "You don't assure me. You solve this." There was no yelling, only a stillness sharper than fury, far more stillness sharper than fury. By hour 3 of the transatlantic flight, the cabin had become an ecosystem of discomfort. Every clink of cutlery sounded louder. Every whispered apology seemed to shrink the room. The attendants tried, God, they tried, to find something to appease him. They even offered to plate a business-class dish, as though it were first class, dress it up, garnish it. He declined each offer with the same devastating politeness. "No," he said, "if you can't deliver what was promised, don't pretend." One attendant, a young man named Oliver, watched all this in silence. He had been on duty long enough to see every kind of passenger. Kind, cruel, indifferent. Something about this man unsettled him, but not because of the anger. It was the control. The way Nathan made refusal feel like a knife sliding across glass. Still, Oliver noticed something the others didn't, a flicker in Nathan's expression when a toddler cried behind him. Just a second of softness before the mask returned. Hours passed, tension calcified, and when the wheels touched down, relief swept the cabin like air rushing into a vacuum. But the story didn't end on the tarmac. Nathan Cole stood before the crew at the gate, his tailored jacket draped over one arm. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't curse. Instead, he spoke in a tone that was calm, almost gentle. "Every person here," he said, "has one job: deliver what's promised." His assistant, standing behind him, held up a phone. A call was already in progress. To corporate, to the airline's senior leadership. "I'm buying this airline," Nathan said simply. The purser blinked. "Excuse me, you heard me," Nathan replied. "I'll own it before the week is out. And when I do, this entire crew will be relieved of duty." Shock rolled through them like turbulence. Oliver felt his breath catch. Not because of the threat. It wasn't a threat anymore, but because of the certainty. He'd seen passengers rant, seen them throw tantrums. This was different. This was execution in slow motion. The captain arrived, too late to change anything. His face pale with the realization of what was unfolding. Nathan looked at each of them in turn. His voice low but carrying weight that crushed any thought of interruption. "You served every seat on this plane," he said. "Except mine. You had 100 chances to fix it. You didn't. You chose convenience over accountability. That's all I need to know." The next hours became legend. Calls were made. Shares shifted. Contracts signed. By the time the story hit newsfeeds, it wasn't framed as a tantrum over a missed meal. It was framed as a decisive acquisition. A headline that read, "Nathan Cole buys struggling airline after in-flight." But inside those headlines, another story lived. Oliver, the quiet attendant who had watched in silence, was called into a private meeting days late. Nathan remembered him. Not his uniform, not his tray service, but the way he had stepped forward when others shrank back, offering help in small, steady ways. "You didn't apologize for something you didn't do," Nathan told him. "You didn't humiliate yourself to appease me. You just did your job." Then, in a moment that stunned the young man, Nathan offered him something unexpected. A promotion, not in the airline, in Cole's own company. For others, there was no such reprieve. The purge was swift, entire rosters rewritten, training programs gutted and rebuilt. The world watched with fascination, outrage, admiration, depending on who was asked. Was this cruelty, or an uncompromising demand for excellence? Only Nathan knew the truth. Late one night, long after the news cycle moved on, he sat alone in his penthouse, a simple plate before him. Not salmon, not foie gras, just a sandwich hastily made, and in the quiet, he remembered his mother's words. "Dignity isn't about what you're given," she had said. "It's about what you give." The next morning, changes began. Not just firings, not just acquisitions, but reforms. Meals improved. Meals improved. Crew training changed. Policies shifted to protect attendants from impossible demands while still holding them to standards. Nathan Cole's name stayed in headlines, but beneath the drama, a different legacy began to take shape. "Perfection isn't the point," he told his board one day. "But accountability, that's non-negotiable." And for those who heard the story secondhand, the legend grew sharper in retelling. The man who ordered first-class salmon and got a revolution instead. The CEO who turned a meal into a message. As for Oliver, he stood years later in a new office, a plaque on his desk, with a line Nathan had spoken to him that first day, a line that had carried him forward ever since. Dignity doesn't need applause, it needs guardians. In the end, the story wasn't really about a plate of food at all. It was about how power, wielded coldly, can destroy or rebuild, how one act of refusal can ripple outward until an entire system bends, and somewhere, in that ripple, a quiet reminder lived on, that even the most entitled demand might reveal a buried longing for something simpler: respect. Viewers are left to wonder, what would you have done? Would you have stood silent in that cabin, tray in hand? Would you have spoken up? Share where you're watching from, share your thoughts. And remember, some stories begin with outrage but end with something far more lasting: change.